So, hello again. Nice to see all of you here. And this time we will talk about securing our databases, specifically database credentials, with an external secret vault to make sure our data is safe. But let's get in a bit of details. So let's talk about first the purpose or the importance of the Zabbix database and the vault itself. So Zabbix database is, I guess, quite obviously important, right? In the database itself, we keep a lot of very sensitive and very important information, and not just the historical data, right? Not just the data we collect and monitor, but also the events that happen, right? The problems that have happened in our environment, maybe the messages that we send to our colleagues, and depending on the situation, content, and type of the company, this already can be a very sensitive part of our infrastructure. But not just that, we keep the entire configuration of our monitoring in the database. In fact, without the database, your Zabbix wouldn't even work, because the configuration keeps also everything that we monitor, right? Every single host, every single item, the intervals, how to retrieve the data for that item. And maybe this item actually needs some credentials to be provided, right? Maybe it's some other database monitoring. Maybe we actually use SSH to connect, to execute a command and get the data, which of course makes this data, which is in the Zabbix database, even more important, even more sensitive, and a big secret from anyone who should not be able to see, know, or view that data, right? So enough purposes to protect the database just by saying this. But again, there can be even more depending on what we monitor, what infrastructure we have, and what is, of course, the policy of the company itself. And to keep that data safe, we can use an external vault. And vault, just as you can imagine or visualize in your mind, is a place where we can keep important things safe, right? Which will be protecting them, which will keep them locked away from anyone who should not have access to this data. And then, of course, also help us to provide access to the people who should view and work with that data based on policies and different level and kind of permissions. And hopefully that, of course, never happens, but if our system, our environment somehow gets compromised, we can immediately lock down the entire vault to make sure, even if, let's say, the database is compromised, at least the secrets, at least the credentials, the maybe database credentials, maybe monitoring credentials will be safe from some, well, hands that are trying to get to that. So how do we do that? How do we set up this? Well, I would say a relatively simple setup to make sure no one will get the credentials to our database where we keep everything sensitive. And also, as an extra addition, not get access to any kind of secrets whatsoever. Well, we will need to talk about the vault support in Zabbix and the communications with the vault. So Zabbix currently supports two kind of vaults, one of which is called HashiCorp vault. This one is very much open source, so you can get it at any moment and install it and self-host it, be that on your own hardware or be that inside of a container. That depends on how you prefer to install and maintain your environment. But there are some key points about the vault itself that you need to keep in mind. So first of all, by default, it will listen on TCP port 8200, right? So if we are going for default ports, then the communication on this port must be available and, of course, protected. So some kind of certificates or some way to encrypt the data must be used. Since the Vault itself also provides web interface to interact with it, to work with it, HTTPS also can be used to make sure the interactions of the users will be protected as well. And Zabbix works specifically with HashiCorp Key V Secret Engine version 2, which includes the secret versioning, right? So you can always track which version of the secret are you working with now, how many times has it changed from its default value, and metadata, like an example when it was created, or let's say how long this secret will be kept in the vault. As I mentioned, it has a web interface, so GUI essentially, which can be used to work with the vault, but some of the things must be done through the CLI. So technically, there's no way you will be able to work only with GUI, right? You will need to work a bit with CLI to make at least the initial configuration. After that, you can safely switch through the web interface. And the macro values use a specific path, right? They have a specific syntax, which you can see right here on the slide, which you might need to provide in Zabbix as well if you will keep not only database credentials in the vault, but other configuration-related secrets. And then there's another vault, the second one, the CyberArk. This one is not so easy, you could say, to get your hands on, right? It's a commercial solution. But the idea is very much similar. It also listens on TCP port, but port is different, which is 1858. Also uses HTTPS, since it also has a GUI of its own. And of course, since it's a completely different wall, the configuration also will be quite different. Again, ID is the same, well, configuration is different. And the sensitive data or credentials can be obtained using APIs or SDKs and will be managed using CyberArk Password Vault Web Access, or again, CLI. The path to the secrets also is a bit different, so keep that in mind depending on what you will be choosing. Both have quite extensive documentation, right? The second one, of course, also kind of has the commercial support included with the first one, with the HashiCorp. It's up to you. Will you opt for it, or you will follow the guides and configure everything on your own? So how do Zabbix integrate with the Vault, and how do Zabbix components communicate with the Vault? Well, the idea and the part at which we will be looking in details is the database credentials, right? So how does Zabbix store them? And it's actually pretty simple. So all the credentials, all the database credentials will be stored in the vault, and Zabbix components each will have access to their own database credentials, which they will initially take from the vault, right? So they will go to the vault, take them out, and only then Zabbix components will be able to connect to the database and then already work with the database, properly connect to it, save the data, get the configuration, and so on. There are some exceptions, however, for the database credentials. Sorry, not for the database credentials, but in terms of secrets, right? So as I mentioned, Vault can also keep secrets such as configuration-related secrets, or in other words, secret macro values. And in this case, the only component which will be getting the secrets, the secret macro values from the Vault, will be Zabbix server. And later on, Zabbix server, well, basically on demand, will share the secrets with the proxy, right? So this is a bit of an exception. Otherwise, each component can very much separately get to their own related data in terms of how to connect to the database. And since each component still works with the data, uses the data, right, to communicate to the database, maybe to the vault itself, or again, maybe between one another to exchange the data to make sure data will not be intercepted in between, right? So nobody can actually just silently listen, get to your traffic, and then silently get the credentials out of that traffic, database credentials themselves. Make sure to encrypt the communications as well, so your data will be as secure as it should be without leaving any possibility of somehow getting to those database credentials. So that means the first thing we will need to do is install the vault. And there are, again, multiple options on how you can do that. You can have one central vault, which will keep the credentials for the databases for each component, right? For Zabbix server, for Zabbix proxy, for frontend, and so on. Or you can install a separate vault for basically each component, right? So Zabbix server can have access to its own vault. Zabbix proxy can, and each Zabbix proxy can have access to its own vault, right? And then the front end also. But then, of course, you need to keep in mind that you will need to manage a lot more installations and somewhat a bit more resources. But that depends on how secure you wish to get. Again, even having one vault can be very much enough. It is recommended to install it on a separate machine, right? To make sure in case of any kind of data breach, your vault will be installed separately, so you can immediately cut the access to the vault. But will you install it or on bare metal, in VM, in a cloud, in a Docker? It's of course up to you. Use the way you usually use in your environment. So let's take a look at the vault installation steps, right? The setup that was used in this installation is a two machine, right? On one I had Zabbix and all the Zabbix related components. On the second one I had vault, but again, you can spread it out. Right, so on the machine on which you decided to have vault, you will need to add the repo itself, right? And install the vault. Pretty much standard installation. Then we just start it. And then we wish to check the status to see, okay, is it working? And what you will see first as you will try to do that, you can see that it will try to make a request, of course, to HTTPS and to localhost. So that's the default address. Your vault is trying to make the request to well, check its own status. And since vault has a lot of secrets in it, it will expect you to use TLS by default. So it will expect that you will use certificates to encrypt the communications. So you would need to configure that as well. There are multiple ways how we can get the certificates. The fastest, I guess, and also the cheapest wise is to use OpenSSL to just generate certificates yourself and then use them for the vault. Right, but since those will be self-signed certificates, you need to keep in mind that you will need to then install them on any system that will use those certificates, so the system actually trusts them. Otherwise, the communication will not happen. Certificates must be trusted, either by the system, or if you will use a trusted CA, then of course, communications also must be possible to verify the certificate. But if you have, let's say, a company-based certificate authority, then you're halfway set. You can use the company CA to sign the certificates, right? And as long as the certificate authority is installed on all the required machines, communication will work. So in this example, we use a simple command to generate a set of certificate and the key, right? Make sure that the common name and the subject alternative name are correct, right? So are the same that you will use for actual connection. And then, of course, make them, again, readable. In this command, I already put them into the opt vault TLS directory, but you can, of course, change that. But if you do change that, make sure when you will define the path and the names of the certificates in the vault configuration file, which is, by the way, using HCL format, make sure you will specify that correct path. Right, and after you've done that, after you generated certificates, made them readable, put them in the correct directory, then of course, restart the vault to apply the changes and check the vault status again. Good news, no more certificate related errors. Bad news, connection was refused because we're still trying to go to the local host. And our certificate does not have the local host specified. It has a completely different common name and sound. Right, so we will export the vault address to make sure the vault will direct its requests to, well, the correct address, which is specified in the certificate. And again, we will check the vault status. So you can see almost everything went fine, but now it didn't like who signed the certificates. And well, since I signed them myself, it's understandable, right? So we need to, we can do two things. We can either set the vault skip verify variable to true, right? It will not verify the certificates and will only use the self-signed ones, which is okay for the vault configuration itself, but not exactly okay for Zabbix. That's why it's a better approach to install them and make them trusted. And this step is also covered further in the slides. And we are checking the vault status again. And finally, we have a vault status. We can see it's not initialized and it's very much sealed, right? But the installation is complete. So how to initialize now the vault and unseal it after we have finished the installation and configuration? Well, it's actually a relatively simple process. But initialization is very important because this is basically the way to prepare the vault to receive the data, right? And first, when we initialize it, right, this configuration and initialization process will make sure that vault will generate the keys for us using the Shamir secret sharing, which will split the root key into multiple keys, which then can be used to kind of recreate the key back, right? And we can set manually when we do the initialization, the amount of keys required to do that. And we specify both how many keys to generate, which can be used for unsealing, right? There can be multiple. And then how many are required to reconstruct the root key, right? So we can have as many key shares as we want. And then we set the threshold. So what is the minimum to actually unseal the wall, right? And this is very important to have those keys always somewhere stored in some password manager, because without unsealing, and you need to do unsealing to do the initial configuration, so without the unsealing, Vault cannot work with its data, right? So the data will stay encrypted for the Vault itself, and that means Vault will not be able to show you the data, show you the configuration, make any configuration, because it itself will not understand what's in that data. But when the vault is unsealed, right, we can use a token, which will be provided for us automatically as soon as we will finish the unsealing to access the secrets. The first and the initial token you get is, of course, the root token, which can do anything, has access to absolutely everything, right? But we can also generate our own tokens for different Zabbix components, in this case, to provide them access to different database credentials. And other tokens usually have some kind of expiration date, right, or time to live, TTL. But the root token, of course, will still stay the same forever and ever. So make sure to keep it very much safe. And the idea is we will use the root token to actually access the vault and configure the vault. right? Then we will generate a token for the Zabbix itself, so it can have access to database credentials and maybe some extra secrets. And Zabbix, using that token, will get them from the vault. So how to initialize the vault? Well, again, first of all, we specified that now we, as an operator, we will initialize the vault, and we specify how many key shares to generate and what will be the minimum threshold to actually unseal the vault. Right, and you can see I specified 3 key shares, the threshold is 2, and that is as many as I got, 3, plus the root token, which again I can use now to make the configuration, but only after I will unseal the vault. So still need to unseal the vault, and we specify the command vault operator unseal, and vault will request one of those 3 keys we just generated. Right, and we will need to provide at least 2 different keys. So this command must be executed twice with different keys. And after that, the vault will finally be initialized and not sealed. So you can see sealed is false now. So now I can do the configuration. Now I can work with the vault. Now I can make some changes. So what is the process of storing the Zabbix database credentials in the vault? Well, it is based on policies and roles. Of course, you can technically use the root token for everything, but that's always a bad idea. So we should generate different access, right? Different tokens for different components. And to do that, again, we will use vault policies and roles. But first, we still need to initialize the Zabbix supported KeyV2 engine. Right, so we can apply the policies to the data which will be stored using this engine. And then we can create roles for different components to access the data. So typically there are 3 types of roles which are used in Zabbix. So to Zabbix server, we usually give access to all secrets, meaning database credentials and macro values. Frontend and proxy do not need, they will not use access to the macro values. So database credentials are completely enough. Right, and Vault works with the HCL configuration parameters. They have a bit of a specific syntax, which is very much, you could say, JSON-like, right? Maybe a bit less commas, but overall, very similar. And since Zabbix does not modify anything that's in the vault, it just gets the secrets from the vault. We need to use only 2 type of access: read, to actually allow to read the secrets, right? To read the secret values, and list. And list allows to see what secrets are in the path, right? But it doesn't show their contents. So you kind of basically need to do list and read. So again, for Zabbix, we give list and read to the database credentials for Zabbix server itself, and also, if required, access to the macro values. Right, it's not mandatory, but it's often the configuration we use. And for and frontend and proxy need only list and read to the database credentials, right? So not to the macros. They will not use the macro values in any way. So let's see how to configure all of that. So I will use first the GUI approach to mainly show you that even if you try to use the graphical user interface, only you will still need to go to the backend. So what I'm doing is opening the URL, the same as you specified in the certificate, right? So in my case, the Vault Meetup one. Method is token because currently I have only the root token to access it. And I enter the root token and press sign in. Then we will finally see the front end, right? So I will need to click on the secrets engine and then click on enable new engine with the plus here. So, right, we need to initialize this KeyV2 secret engine. You will need to specify the path. Path can be any, right? Zabbix is just the classic approach, and also it makes it easier for anyone who would like to look at that to understand that it's Zabbix related secrets. And then we enable the engine. And you can see here that we can do the same from the command line, and then it becomes a lot faster and simpler, right? Because what we do, first of all, we export the vault root token, right? So it was always is set as a variable, essentially in the memory, right? And then we just execute vault secrets enable path Zabbix key VV2, right? Done. No clicks and quite faster. But that's not all. Currently, we just initialized the engine, right? We didn't create any secrets yet. We just technically created a shelf to keep the secrets. So in secrets engine, we then select our newly created Zabbix engine, and then click the create secret plus on the right? All the create buttons are always in the, well, upper right. And then we specify path for the secret, right? So here it is. We specify the front end. We define secret names, right? Those will be names of our secrets. And then we define values for those. Very similar to how the macros work in Zabbix. So you can basically say it's an extra set of macros. Or you can do that using, again, CLI, right, from the server side, and then just specify put Zabbix frontend, right, directory-like, and then specify the values. So those are the front-end database credentials at the moment. So, okay, now we have secrets, we have engine secrets. We now need to give access to them, right? We will not use the root token. And this can be done using the roles. So role is essentially a pre-configured set of permissions, right? And when someone will authenticate using their own token, they will just pass the role to the vault, and vault immediately will see and know what kind of access do they have. Similar approaches with the configuration itself. But the roles can be created, at least at the moment, only using CLI, right? So there's no way to do that from the web interface itself. So, so let's see what I'm doing, right? So first, I'm still in GUI, right? Still in web interface. I click in the top left on this icon right here. It will open a terminal-like, but in web interface of the vault. And I create a token, right? It says a role, but I'm actually creating a token, which will give access to Zabbix frontend and Zabbix server in the future for 1 month. By the way, you can also create so-called periodical tokens, which will never expire, which is a good way for applications, right? For Zabbix, an example. And you can see it was successful, right? This can be done again from the GUI CLI or from the server CLI. It depends on what would you prefer. And then we need to close this CLI, web-based CLI. Click on the policies, create a CL policy. We essentially just name the policy and paste it, right? Just as you can see it here in the window. That we give the list and read permission to Zabbix data frontend. I still don't have a role, so just at this moment, I will need to go to the backend itself, and now I can create a role based on the policy that I've created, and the role name will be Zabbix. And as soon as I will execute this command, the token will be generated, token which has access only to frontend database credentials. And as you can see, it will be alive, you could say, or usable for 1 month. If you wish, you can confirm by using this command right here that indeed you did everything correctly, right? That the secrets are there and token has access to them. And after that, what you will need to do is confirm from the Zabbix frontend machine that it can actually access it, right? And you can see HTTPS is used. So here, what will happen is the test of encryption in your certificates, and you should also see the data. If you're using self-signed ones, you will need to install them again system-wide. either the certificates themselves or the CA. If, again, you will not do that, the communication will not happen, right? Even with skip verify set to true, which we did earlier, still will not work. It must be proper. Right, and then we go to the front-end configuration file, which is located in etc zabbix web zabbix.conf php. We delete our previous credentials, which we define manually in a text file, not very secure. And then we replace them with the vault configuration and the token itself. Right, and then after that, we should be able to open the URL of our frontend and see that everything is working fine. All is left, it's the Zabbix server, right? Because it still connects to the same database, even though using different database credentials. Zabbix server is also very much important for our monitoring and also has more access to the database. So those credentials typically are even more important. Right, so using the similar approach, I create a secret, this time using only CLI for the Zabbix server database credentials. Create the policy. Again, remember that I'm using Vault only to keep database credentials, not macro values. So just list and read. Writing the new policy to the Vault, creating the token, testing if the token works. So it's basically the same process, but now for each component, right? With a bit of an exception. I still need to go to the Zabbix server configuration file, but there I specify very similar things. I specify which vault to use. Remember, we have two that are supported. Token, which I have generated, vault URL, and the DB path, so that Zabbix server will go to the correct place for the database credentials. And then again, save, restart, and everything should work. It's actually as simple as that. I guess the hardest part is the vault installation. With Zabbix, everything is always straightforward. So some extra notes to make sure this process will go smoother for you. Again, I would suggest using CLI only for the initial configuration. Everything else you can do later using the web interface. But the initial one definitely will be CLI focused. Using self-signed certificates, unless they have at least the common, let's say company-wide CA, is not a very good idea, not a very bad one, also not a good one, right? So it's better to, again, use the CA, but common one, the company one, or again, use the trusted ones. But if you still decided to use self-signed certs without the CA or with the CA, make sure to install either the CA, Certificate Authority, or the certificates on all the Vault and Zabbix related machines, so the systems will trust them. If you will use the so-called periodic tokens, which are not, they don't have the expiry date. You can set an expiry date for them, but specifically a date, or not set it, and they will not expiry never, because Zabbix will renew them automatically, right? Zabbix will always basically specify that I'm still using this token is still active, right? Don't remove them. If a token is unused, Vault removes them automatically. Zabbix can also monitor your wall and can monitor it out of the box. So you can see again how the tokens are doing, how the vault is doing, and is everything is in normal state, nothing is expiring, and your Zabbix will not suddenly stop working because it cannot access the vault itself because the token has expired. And of course, if you want to learn how to keep the secrets or the macro secrets in the vault and how to monitor the vault, we do provide even more in depth with the practicals, of course, in the Zabbix Certified Expert training. Otherwise, thank you for your attention, and I can see there are some questions in the Q&A section.
Yes, there are two. Let me read them out for you. So are vaults mainly used as a more secure alternative to secret text in macros, or they are used somewhere else also?
Well, I guess the presentation answers that kind of, but they're used essentially to, yes, indeed, as a more secure alternative to secret text macros, right, in Zabbix, and also to store your database credentials.
Thank you. Keys need to be manually entered each time the vault restarts. That's a question. This means that if the VM restarts and I do not unlock the vault, everything is blocked. Correct?
You are very much correct. That's exactly how it will be. That's why quite frequently the typical vault installation is actually high availability installation. So you usually have two vaults in case one dies, you can immediately switch to another, not to manually open it.
Okay,